I never imagined my own mother would stand in court and demand to take my child away from me. But she did. On a Tuesday morning, inside a Richmond courtroom, she stepped up to the witness stand and began dismantling my life piece by piece. Every word was carefully chosen to prove that I was a bad mother. There was only one thing she didn't know. For 15 years, she had no idea about the truth of my work. And that day, I had to choose stay silent and lose my son, or reveal to everyone who I truly was.
This isn't just a story, it's a confession, whispered into the dark. If you leave your mark or comment, I'll like it shows the Redditor-X-Tales family you were really here listening. And when you subscribe and tap the bell, you're not just supporting this channel, you're helping this story find someone who truly needs it. We at Redditor-X-Tales are grateful you're here.
My name is Sarah Johnson, and at 39 years old, I finally understood that the deepest wound can come from the very hand that once rocked your cradle. It all unfolded that morning in a crowded family courtroom in Richmond, where the air smelled of old wood and was heavy with tension, a mixture of frayed nerves and broken hopes. The moment my mother, Dorothy Edwards, rose to the stand, something inside me snapped with an almost audible crack. She wore the elegant navy suit I had given her last Christmas, back when I still believed we were one family. Now that suit looked like morning clothes, mourning for what we once had. Her voice, once warm and familiar, now cut straight through me. I felt each word etching an invisible scar into my chest. She spoke with a confident cruelty, as if she had been preparing for this betrayal for months. To Judge Patricia Harrison, my mother described me as unstable, incapable of keeping a job, always running to therapists. In her version of my life, I was nothing more than a failure. My hands trembled so badly that I had to lock them together under the table. The tightly wound bun pulling at my scalp, a symbol of discipline I had carried for years, now felt like it was strangling me. A pale strip of skin on my ring finger throbbed under the lights, reminding me of the day, just 6 months earlier, when I tore off my wedding ring, scratching my skin until it bled. Michael Sterling, my ex-husband, sat across from me with that smug half-smile I had despised even during our worst fights. A chill spread through my chest as I saw his attorney, James Wilson, nod along with every dagger my mother threw. Her words hurt more than any sentence I had ever heard in a courtroom. My 8-year-old son Ethan sat in the front row, his dark eyes darting back and forth between his grandmother and me, filled with confusion so raw it crushed my heart. Beside him, my sister Lisa refused to meet my gaze. Her silence spoke louder than words of consent, complicity, or perhaps something even worse. My mother pressed on, each new accusation hitting me like a stone. She spoke about my tiny downtown apartment, my old car, about how I could barely afford school supplies for Ethan. Her words painted me as a woman too weak to give her child a decent life, unlike Michael, my ex-husband, with his beautiful suburban home, steady income, and ability to provide everything a child could ever want. But the cruelest blow came when she questioned my work. Her voice grew firm as she claimed I was always secretive about my so-called career, that I pretended to have an important job but never explained what it really was, that she suspected me of something illegal, something that could endanger her grandson. A murmur of approval swept through the courtroom. Michael's family filled the left side of the gallery, nodding along with each word of this public execution of my character. My side of the room was almost empty, just a few friends who truly knew the truth about my life, sitting like small islands of support in an ocean of hostility. You can't even imagine what happened next. When my mother finished her testimony and returned to her seat, I felt the courtroom transform into an arena, and I was the hunted animal trapped inside it. The left side of the gallery was packed with Michael's family, his parents, Robert and Margaret Sterling, his sister Jennifer with her husband, even distant relatives I'd only ever seen at weddings and funerals. They sat together like a united army, ready to strike the final blow. Michael's attorney, James Wilson, rose with theatrical slowness, using my mother's testimony like a weapon as he smoothed his expensive suit. Every gesture radiated the confidence of a predator who had already scented blood. My throat was so dry I could barely swallow as he began to declare that my own mother's testimony clearly proved I was unfit to raise Ethan. Each word dropped into the courtroom like a stone breaking the surface of still water, inability to provide stability, secrecy about work that might endanger the child's mental instability. Nausea spread through my stomach. I could never have imagined such betrayal, as if everyone around me had conspired to dismantle my life piece by piece. Michael sat with a stony expression, but I knew him too well. I caught the faint twitch at the corner of his mouth, the trace of a smile he was still suppressing. 6 years of marriage had trained me to read his micro-expressions. Now he was savoring my humiliation like a long-awaited dessert after a heavy meal. His mother, Margaret, nodded at every word the attorney spoke, her face serene as if listening to a sermon in church. She had never accepted me as part of their family, always considered me unworthy of her precious son. And now she finally had what she had long desired, public confirmation of my worthlessness. In that moment, I remembered every Christmas dinner where she barely spoke to me, every sharp remark about my strange work schedule. Michael's sister, Jennifer, sat beside her mother, nodding too. The same Jennifer who once pretended to be my friend, prying into the details of our family life, details she must have passed right back to her brother. It felt like each of them had been assigned a role in this carefully staged performance. And I knew this was only the beginning. Something told me the worst was yet to come, though at the time I couldn't begin to imagine how this day would end. My 8-year-old son Ethan sat between his grandmother and his aunt, a small prisoner caught in their custody. His dark eyes, just like mine, darted from face to face, trying to understand why every adult around him was saying such awful things about his mother. Seeing that confusion in his eyes hurt more than any accusation. Judge Harrison, in a rare decision, ruled that he should be present in the courtroom. She ordered constant supervision to ensure the boy wasn't directly pulled into the conflict. And my sister Lisa remained silent, as still as a statue. Her silence was louder than any words of support she could have offered. Every time I tried to catch her eye, she looked away at her hands, the ceiling, anywhere but me. In that refusal lay something more bitter than cowardice. Perhaps she, too, believed I was guilty. Meanwhile, the attorney continued, now painting an idyllic picture of the life Ethan's father could offer him. A spacious house in Chesterfield with a large backyard, a steady job in finance, respect in the community. Against that backdrop, my life looked pathetic: a tiny apartment, an old car, a mysterious job no one could understand. My stomach knotted tighter as I realized how masterfully they had orchestrated this attack. This wasn't a burst of anger or a chance alignment of witnesses. Someone had planned every move, every word, every testimony with surgical precision. And the most devastating part was knowing that my own mother had become the sharpest weapon in their war against me. When Judge Patricia Harrison turned to me and asked how I responded to all these accusations, it felt as if my lungs refused to draw in the heavy air around me. Years of working inside the court system had taught me one thing: timing is everything. And my time had just arrived. Yes, you heard that right. All those years, I had indeed been working within the judicial system. Not in ordinary hearings, but in the most closed proceedings, the kind no outsider was ever allowed to attend. The information we handled was classified, and a single word spoken out of place could have cost me my career. I had grown used to silence, to secrecy, to holding my tongue even with those closest to me. And now, standing here, I understood. Silence no longer protected me. It only destroyed me. The time had come to speak the truth. I rose slowly, every muscle in my body tightening in anticipation. My throat tightened, but when I finally spoke, my voice came out steady, almost unshakable. I told the judge I wished to call a witness who could testify about my work. Attorney James Wilson leapt to his feet, his face splotched red with outrage. He protested, insisting they had received no notice of such a witness. Michael, my ex-husband, frowned, clearly trying to guess what card I was about to play. His mother, Margaret, leaned forward, her face lit with a predator's curiosity. My heart pounded so loudly I feared the entire courtroom could hear it. I explained that a witness had only become available that very morning, but his testimony would clarify every question about my employment and financial standing. Judge Harrison nodded, granting me permission to proceed. All those years of silence collapsed into a single moment. I spoke the name, William Kingston, Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court. The silence that followed was deafening. It lasted only a few seconds, but those seconds stretched into eternity. And then the room erupted in muffled gasps, whispers, the rustle of restless movement. I saw my mother's expression shift from confidence to confusion, and then to something resembling fear. Michael sat frozen, his mouth open, the smug smile evaporating like morning fog. His attorney, Wilson, flipped through his papers frantically, as if the answers might somehow be hidden there. Meanwhile, Chief Justice Kingston walked toward the witness stand with the calm dignity that only comes from decades of service at the highest levels of the judicial system. In that moment, I knew the game was only beginning. And at last, the cards were in my hands. When Chief Justice Kingston took his place at the witness stand, I felt something fundamental shift in the world around me. For so long I had hidden the truth behind a mask of ordinariness, and now that mask was about to fall forever. My breathing steadied, my hands stopped trembling. For the first time all morning, I felt I belonged exactly where I was. I approached the witness stand with a confidence built from years of professional experience. There was still a lump in my throat, but it was no longer fear, it was the tremor of long-awaited release. When I asked my first question, my voice was calm, professional, the voice of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Chief Justice Kingston looked at me with a respect I hadn't seen in any pair of eyes in that courtroom. His words fell like thunder. I was the Honorable Sarah Johnson, Associate Justice of the State Supreme Court, where I had served with distinction for the past 8 years. The silence that followed was unlike any before. If earlier it was tense anticipation of my humiliation, now it was stunned disbelief. I heard my mother gasp sharply, as if she had been punched in the stomach. Michael stared at me as though seeing me for the very first time. My heart now beat not with fear, but with bitter satisfaction. 8 years earlier, I had been one of the youngest judges in the state's history, appointed at 31. I had presided over cases that changed thousands of lives. And these people, my own family, had thought I was some kind of failure. The Chief Justice continued his testimony, each word striking the courtroom like a hammer against an anvil. I chaired the Committee on Judicial Ethics. My rulings in family law and child protection had become precedents. I handled the most complex criminal cases, including capital punishment. A strange warmth filled my chest, a mixture of pride and sadness that I had to prove my worth this way. When he spoke of my financial standing, I watched Michael's face grow paler. My annual salary was $210,000, plus benefits. The downtown apartment everyone dismissed as a struggling woman's home was, in truth, a penthouse worth $1.5 million. I owned a mountain retreat I had purchased 3 years earlier. Every financial record of mine was publicly accessible, as required by law for all higher-ranking judges. I turned toward the gallery. My mother sat with her mouth open, her face slowly flushing with shame. It was time for explanations, and with each word I spoke, the weight grew lighter. 8 years ago, when I was appointed to the Supreme Court, I chose to separate my professional life from my personal one. Not out of shame, quite the opposite. I wanted my son Ethan to grow up like an ordinary child. Ethan's eyes now shone with wonder and something that looked like pride. Those dark eyes, so much like mine, finally understood why his mother so often worked late, why sometimes disappeared for weeks, consumed by cases. My throat tightened with tenderness. He had always been so patient, so understanding. I had wanted Ethan to learn the value of hard work and humility, not to grow up spoiled by his mother's position. That was why I drove an ordinary car, lived without flashy displays of wealth. I wanted him to understand that status and money are the result of effort, not a reason for arrogance. The reason for my long absences was that I presided over trials that could stretch for weeks or months. The reason I sometimes missed school events was because I was writing judicial opinions that shaped the lives of thousands of families across the state. In my chest, something like freedom swelled as if the heavy weight I had carried for years was finally slipping off my shoulders. Chief Justice Kingston added the final stroke to my portrait. In 30 years of his career, he said, he had met few attorneys with legal minds as sharp as mine. My rulings were routinely upheld by federal courts. I had been recognized on a national level for my work in family law. And now, as accusations of being unfit to care for my own son echoed from the very people who had never cared to know my real life, it wasn't merely insulting, it was absurd. 15 years of silence were over, and there was no going back. I watched as the truth crashed over the courtroom in wave after wave, washing away years of prejudice and false assumptions. Attorney James Wilson sat at his table wearing the face of a man who had just realized he'd been playing chess with a grandmaster, all the while believing it was a novice. His expensive suit suddenly looked like a cheap disguise. Beneath it was only a bewildered man who understood he had lost the game before it even began. But the hardest part was looking at my mother. Dorothy sat in the front row, and I saw her face cycle through an entire palette of emotions from shock to shame, from shame to something that looked like physical pain. Her hands trembled so violently on her lap that she clenched them into fists, but the shaking only grew worse. A bitter knot rose in my throat, not from pity, but from the realization that the woman who gave me life had been willing to destroy my reputation without asking a single question first. Michael was pale as chalk. 6 years of marriage, and not once had he asked about the details of my work. Not once had he wondered why I stayed late at the ordinary court, why I brought home mountains of documents, why I sometimes received weekend calls about urgent cases. He had simply assumed I was some minor clerk, and that explanation was enough for him. Now he looked at me as though I were a ghost familiar, yet utterly foreign. The air in the courtroom grew thick with awkwardness and shock. I could feel Michael's family, the entire stelling armada that half an hour earlier had nodded along to every accusation, now avoiding my gaze. His mother, Margaret, who had always treated me with barely concealed disdain, suddenly studied her own hands as if seeing them for the first time. I almost pitied them, because they had planned to judge me without knowing the facts, clinging to the comfort of their prejudice that I was a failure. Judge Harrison asked Attorney Wilson to respond to what he had just heard. He rose slowly, like an old man, though he was no older than 50. Each word left his mouth with difficulty, as if every sentence inflicted physical pain. He began apologizing for his lack of information about my profession, but even his apology rang false, the flimsy excuse of a man caught in his own deception. And then he made the mistake that buried Michael's case for good. Wilson suggested that even with my high status, the long hours of my job might negatively affect my ability to raise a child. The air in the room crackled with the absurdity of that statement. A cold, merciless fire lit inside my chest. Judge Harrison looked at him with an expression that could have frozen water in July. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet, but each word sliced the air like a blade. She reminded Wilson that questioning a sitting justice's ability to balance parenthood with professional duties was not only unethical, but professionally unacceptable, especially given my specialization in family law. I watched Michael shrink in his chair, realizing his attorney had just committed professional suicide. All those months since the divorce, he had built his plans on taking Ethan away from me, proving my unfitness as a mother. And now it was revealed that he had tried to take a child from one of the most respected judges in the state, a judge whose very expertise was protecting children's best interests. But the cruelest wound came not from Michael or his lawyer, it was my sister Lisa's silence. Even now, when the truth stood undeniable, she remained motionless, offering nothing. She sat beside our mother, and in her silence I read something darker than cowardice. Perhaps a part of her still doubted me. Perhaps she believed I had deceived even the Supreme Court itself. I won't overwhelm you with every last detail of the proceedings. I think by now you understand how it ended. I proved my case. I showed the truth. I shook off the shadow they had tried for years to cast over me. I defended my right to be Ethan's mother. But along with victory came a harsh realization: even when you win the battle, your heart can remain wounded. Sometimes victory is heavier than any defeat. That day I understood the price was far higher than I could have imagined. Yes, the court affirmed I was a fit mother. But in the process, I lost the family I had spent years trying to hold together. And maybe the bitter truth is that I never really had them at all. As Judge Harrison began to deliver her ruling, the air in the courtroom grew so dense that every breath felt like a struggle. I sat upright, my hands folded neatly on the table, but inside me raged a storm of conflicting emotions. 15 years of professional experience had taught me how to read judges by their micro-expressions, and I already knew the decision would be in my favor. And yet that knowledge brought no comfort. Her words fell into the silence like stones into a well. The evidence presented clearly demonstrates the mother's outstanding qualifications as an attorney and her impeccable reputation within the professional community. Her financial stability is beyond question. The allegations of her inability to provide for her child are based on false assumptions and unreliable information. I was winning, and that much was obvious. But with each sentence the judge spoke, I felt something inside me dying. Not from fear or grief, but from the bitter realization that some victories come at too high a cost. Judge Harrison continued, her voice firming with each word. The testimony presented by the father's side, including that of the child's grandmother, raises serious concerns regarding both motives and credibility. The attempt to tarnish the reputation of a high-ranking judge without factual grounds is unacceptable and borders on defamation. I stole a glance at my mother. Dorothy sat like a stern statue, only her lips trembling faintly. In her eyes I saw something I had never seen there before: fear. Not fear for Ethan, not fear for the family's future, but fear for herself. The fear of a woman who had finally realized she had crossed a line from which there was no return. The court's ruling was merciless in its fairness. Full custody was granted to me, Ethan's mother. The father was limited to supervised visitation every 2 weeks, under the observation of a social worker, until he completed mandatory parenting classes and family therapy. The minimum duration was set at 6 months, with the possibility of extension. Michael sat with his head bowed, his shoulders slumped like a puppet whose strings had been cut. 6 months ago, he had been certain he would easily take Ethan from me, proving my unfitness as a mother. Now he had been granted less access than he'd had before the divorce. The irony of it was so sharp it almost made me pity him. But the harshest blow came in the final clause of Judge Harrison's ruling. Given the false accusations and the attempt to manipulate the process with knowingly misleading testimony, the court recommended excluding the extended family from future custody discussions until further notice. Those words struck my mother like a hammer. I saw her flinch as if she had been slapped. The court had effectively barred her from seeing her grandson without my explicit permission. The same woman who, half an hour earlier, had stood so confidently declaring my unfitness as a mother was now cut off from the very family she had tried to claim as her own. A metallic taste rose in my throat. This was what I had wanted, what I had fought for 3 months of preparation. But why did victory feel like defeat? Perhaps because, until the very last moment, I had still hoped that the truth would change their hearts. that my mother would apologize, that my sister would reach out and embrace me, that Michael would admit his mistake. Instead, all I received was a legal victory and the shattered remains of what once felt like family. When Judge Harrison finally declared the session closed, the courtroom began to empty slowly. Michael's family walked out without turning back, like people leaving the site of a disaster. My mother rose on unsteady legs and made her way to the exit without once looking at me. Only Ethan ran up to me, his eyes shining. "Mom, we won?" he asked, his voice filled with such pure joy that my heart clenched with both tenderness and pain. "Yes, sweetheart, we won," I answered, holding him close. But this victory was steeped in the bitter knowledge that some relationships cannot be repaired, and not even by the most undeniable truth. In that moment I understood that justice can arrive in a form that breaks not only the guilty, but also those who fight for it, and that even the most righteous victory can leave behind only emptiness where a family used to be. 6 months later, I sat in my office at the Supreme Court building, reviewing a case on parental rights termination. Outside, October rain trickled down the window, each drop sliding as slowly as time had moved since that unforgettable day in court. In my desk drawer lay an unopened letter from my mother of the 3rd that month. I already knew what it said without reading: apologies, attempts to explain the inexplicable, pleased to see her grandson. My fingers brushed over the envelope's smooth surface, and a familiar wave of conflicting emotions rose in my chest. The anger had long since burned away, leaving behind something more complex, a mixture of pity, disappointment, and an odd sense of relief. I no longer had to pretend to be someone else for people who had never truly tried to know me. Michael had completed his parenting courses and was now allowed visitation with Ethan. When he picked up our son, I saw something new in his eyes, and not remorse, but a cautious respect, the look of a man who finally understood he had been playing far out of his league. Our conversations were now short and to the point, like business partners managing a joint venture. Strangely enough, those interactions felt more honest than all 6 years of our marriage. Ethan adjusted to his new reality with the resilience only children seemed to have. Now he proudly told his classmates that his mom was a judge, that she helped families solve difficult problems. Just yesterday, he asked if he could one day attend one of my hearings. In his dark eyes, so much like mine, burned curiosity and something that looked like admiration. And I realized that look alone was worth all those years of silence. But the deepest wound was my sister. Lisa never wrote a line, never called once. We lived in the same city. Her silence remained a mystery I might never solve. 3 months ago, I had been invited to speak at a judicial conference in Atlanta, delivering a lecture on balancing professional duties with parenting. As I stepped up to the podium, more than 300 people sat in the audience: colleagues, attorneys, advocates. For the first time in 15 years, I spoke openly about how long I had hidden my status from my family, about the price of that choice, and about what I had learned about myself in the process. The applause that followed wasn't mere professional courtesy. There was something deeper in it: recognition, understanding. Afterward, colleagues approached me, shared their own stories, their struggles balancing career and family. And I realized my story wasn't an isolated tragedy, but part of a larger human drama: the universal difficulty of being understood by those you love. Now, sifting through the files on my desk, I thought about how my life had changed. I no longer hid my achievements behind a mask. Just last month, my article on family law reform had been published in the Harvard Law Review, and I proudly showed it to Ethan. He didn't understand every word, but he understood the most important part: that his mother's work mattered, that it helped people. At night, when I read to him before bed, he sometimes asks, "Why did Grandma say those bad things?" or "Why didn't Dad know you were a judge?" Answering those questions wasn't any easier than ruling on capital cases. But I had learned to tell the truth even when it was hard to hear. "Sometimes people we love do things that hurt us," I explained. And sometimes we make choices that lead to consequences we never expected. Recently, Chief Justice Kingston asked me to lead a new federal initiative for children's rights. The role would require frequent trips to Washington, public speaking, working with Congress. 2 years ago, I would have said no, afraid that such visibility might harm Ethan. Now I understood that hiding no longer served any purpose. When I told Ethan about the offer, he asked if it meant his mom would become an even more important judge. Yes, maybe, I replied. Then I added, but the most important thing is that I will always be your mom, no matter what my job is. He nodded with the seriousness of an 8-year-old trying to grasp the adult world. I accepted the offer. Not out of ambition, not to prove anything to those who betrayed me, but because I had finally learned a simple truth. Hiding your light doesn't protect you, it only allows others to underestimate your strength. And because I wanted my son to grow up knowing his mother had never been ashamed of who she was. The letter from my mother remained unopened. Perhaps one day I would read it. Perhaps we would find a way to rebuild our relationship with one founded on truth, not illusions. But that would be my choice, in my time, on my terms. For now, the rain outside was fading, and sunlight pierced through the clouds. A new day, new cases, new chances to be myself, or without masks, without apologies, without fear of what others might think. And for the first time in many years, that thought didn't frighten me. It set me free. Sometimes I wondered, what if I had chosen silence back then, clinging to a false peace? The thought still tugged at my heart. But I had made my choice. And now I knew only the truth had given me the strength to move forward and the chance to finally build a future where my son and I could live without fear.
Hey. That's it, today's story comes to an end. And honestly, thank you from the heart of the Redditor-X-Tales family for staying with us until the very last word. We at Redditor-X-Tales love to know what you think really. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read them all. And trust me, your words mean more than you realize. If you're hungry for more, the full playlist is waiting in the description. And don't worry, new true stories are already on the way. The Redditor-X-Tales family can't wait to share them with you. If this journey touched you even a little, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you'll never miss the next story. Once again, thank you for listening. Until next time, take care.